The chandelier cast diamond patterns across the marble floor as Sarah Mitchell adjusted the white orchid centerpieces for the third time. Her hands moved with practiced precision, each flower positioned to perfection. Tonight's charity gala would raise over $2 million for underprivileged children, but the real currency being exchanged was influence. Sarah stepped back to survey her work. The ballroom of their Palo Alto mansion gleamed like a tech industry cathedral. Every detail reflected her vision, from the sustainable catering to the interactive donation displays. She had built this event from scratch, just like everything else in their empire. "Darling, you've outdone yourself again," David Mitchell said, appearing beside her with his trademark confident smile. At 48, he still commanded every room he entered. His custom-tailored suit emphasized his lean frame, and his silver-touched hair gave him the distinguished look that graced magazine covers. Sarah turned to face her husband of 20 years. "The Children's Foundation means everything to me. You know that." David's phone buzzed. His eyes flicked to the screen, and Sarah caught the subtle change in his expression. A microsecond of excitement, quickly masked. "Business never stopped," he said, slipping the device back into his pocket. "The board wants updates on the new AI platform." Sarah nodded, though something felt off. David's company, Mitchell Technologies, was preparing for its biggest product launch ever. The stress was understandable, but lately his absences felt different, more secretive. Guests began arriving at 7 sharp. Silicon Valley's elite filed through their front doors. Venture capitalists, startup founders, tech journalists. Sarah moved through the crowd with elegant efficiency, her navy blue dress conveying both sophistication and approachability. "Sarah, this is absolutely stunning," said Patricia Wells, a prominent investor. "You have such an eye for creating memorable experiences." "Thank you, Patricia. I believe every event should tell a story." As the evening progressed, Sarah watched David work the room. He was magnetic, discussing market trends and innovation with infectious enthusiasm. When he took the stage for his keynote speech, the room fell silent. "Technology without humanity is just noise," David began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "At Mitchell Technologies, we believe in building tools that strengthen families, not replace them. My wife Sarah reminds me daily that our greatest innovation isn't an algorithm. It's the love we share with those closest to us." The audience applauded. Sarah smiled and nodded from her spot near the back, but something cold settled in her stomach. Those were her words. She had written that speech 3 weeks ago, during one of David's late-night conference calls. During dinner, Sarah excused herself to check on the kitchen staff. As she walked past David's study, she heard his voice through the cracked door. "I know tonight is complicated, but this event was planned months ago. Tomorrow we can discuss the prototype revision." Sarah paused. Prototype revision? David hadn't mentioned any issues with the AI platform. "Rebecca, you're incredible. The way you handled the board presentation was brilliant." Rebecca. Sarah's chest tightened. Rebecca Stone was David's vice president of marketing, a 29-year-old rising star who had joined the company 18 months ago. Sarah had met her several times at corporate events. Beautiful, sharp, ambitious. "I can't wait to celebrate with you properly," David continued, his voice dropping lower. Sarah's hands began to shake. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. "The hotel reservation is confirmed for Thursday. Tell them you're attending the vendor conference in San Francisco." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Hotel reservation. Vendor conference. The careful planning in David's voice. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a recent mistake. This was an ongoing affair. She forced herself to move away from the door before she could hear more. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly as she made her way back to the ballroom. The sounds of conversation and clinking glasses felt surreal, like she was watching her life through thick glass. For the rest of the evening, Sarah performed her role flawlessly. She thanked donors, posed for photos, and discussed the foundation's impact with genuine passion. Inside, her mind raced. How long had this been going on? Were there others? Did anyone else know? When the last guest departed at 11:30, Sarah stood in the empty ballroom surrounded by abandoned champagne glasses and wilted flowers. The silence felt crushing. David appeared behind her, loosening his tie. That was a tremendous success. The foundation should receive their largest donation in history. Microm, yes, Sarah said quietly. The children will benefit greatly. You look tired. Why don't you head upstairs? I have a few calls to return. More calls, more lies. Sarah nodded and kissed his cheek, tasting the bitter irony of the gesture. David, she said, turning back as he headed toward his study. Do you remember when we first talked about starting the foundation? He paused, looking slightly annoyed. Of course. We wanted to give back. You said families were sacred, that protecting children was our highest calling. I still believe that. Sarah studied his face, searching for any sign of guilt or remorse. She found only impatience. Good night, darling. Alone in their bedroom, Sarah sat on the edge of their king-size bed and stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a life built on shared dreams and mutual respect. Or so she had believed. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. When had she become so naive, so blind to the obvious signs? David's late nights, unexplained absences, the way he barely looked at her anymore unless they were in public. She thought about the early days when they had worked together to build Mitchell Technologies from nothing. Sarah had written the original prototype for the productivity app that became their flagship product. She had designed the user interface, developed the marketing strategy, even suggested the company name. But when success came, David gradually pushed her toward a more traditional role. The company needs a public face, he had said, and our family needs you at home. Sarah had agreed, believing they were partners in building something meaningful. She had signed away her ownership stake to focus on raising their children and supporting David's vision. Now she wondered if that had been his plan all along. Her phone buzzed with a text from her 16-year-old son, Michael. Great party, Mom. Dad seemed happy. If only you knew, Sarah thought. She typed back, Thank you, sweetie. Sleep well. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a decision. She would not confront David immediately. She would not make accusations or demands. Instead, she would do what she had always done best: observe, plan, and execute with precision. Because if David Mitchell thought he could discard her like an outdated piece of software, he was about to learn that the woman who built his empire still remembered how to tear it down. 3 weeks after the gala, Sarah sat in her Tesla in the parking lot of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she watched the entrance, feeling like a spy in her own life. She had told David she was shopping for Emma's birthday party, a lie that came easier than she had expected. The vendor conference story had been bothering her for days. A quick check of Mitchell Technologies' official calendar showed no such event scheduled. When Sarah called the Marriott that typically hosted their corporate meetings, they confirmed no company bookings for the week. Now she was here, following her own husband like a private investigator. At 2:15, David's silver Mercedes pulled into the valet area. Sarah slumped lower in her seat, her heart hammering. David emerged wearing his casual Friday attire. Dark jeans, white button-down, navy blazer. He looked relaxed, even happy, in a way she hadn't seen at home in months. 5 minutes later, Rebecca Stone arrived in a red BMW convertible. She wore a flowing sundress and oversized sunglasses, looking more like she was heading to Napa than a business meeting. Sarah watched Rebecca hand her keys to the valet and walk toward the entrance with confident strides. The scene felt like watching a movie about someone else's life. This couldn't be her husband, her marriage, her reality. Sarah waited 30 minutes before entering the hotel. She approached the concierge desk with her most charming smile. Excuse me, I'm meeting my colleagues from Mitchell Technologies. Could you direct me to their conference room? The young man consulted his computer. I don't show any corporate events today. Are you sure they're meeting here? Perhaps they booked a private dining room? Let me check our restaurant reservations. His fingers flew across the keyboard. I do see a reservation for Mitchell, but it's for 2 people in our rooftop suite restaurant. Sarah's stomach dropped. The rooftop suite? Yes, it's our most exclusive dining space. Very romantic setting. Romantic. The word echoed in Sarah's mind as she thanked the concierge and walked back to her car on unsteady legs. She sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, alternating between rage and numbness. Her phone rang. David. Hi, sweetheart. His voice sounded perfectly normal. How's the shopping going? Fine, Sarah managed. Found some nice decorations for Emma's party. That's great. I'm stuck in this conference all afternoon, so I'll probably grab dinner here rather than fighting traffic. Don't wait up. The casual lie made Sarah feel sick. Of course. See you tomorrow. She drove home in a daze, her mind spinning with questions. How long had this been going on? Were there warning signs she had missed? More importantly, what was she going to do about it? That evening, Sarah helped 14-year-old Emma with her algebra homework while Michael practiced guitar in his room. The normalcy of family life felt surreal given what she had discovered. Mom, are you okay? Emma asked, looking up from her textbook. You seem distracted. Sarah forced a smile. Just thinking about your birthday party. I want it to be perfect. You always make everything perfect. Sometimes I think you care more about these events than anyone else does. The innocent comment hit deeper than Emma could know. Sarah had spent 20 years making everything perfect for everyone else. Perfect home, perfect family, perfect public image. What had she received in return? Later that night, Sarah sat in her home office researching private investigators on her laptop. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was using the internet connection David paid for to investigate his betrayal. She found a highly rated firm called Clarity Investigations, run by a former FBI agent named Marcus Chen. The website emphasized discretion and thorough documentation. Sarah stared at the contact form for 30 minutes before closing the laptop. Was she really ready for this? Once she hired an investigator, there would be no going back to ignorant bliss. But could she continue living a lie? Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Conference ran late. Staying downtown tonight. Love you. Sarah typed back, love you too. The lie felt like poison in her mouth. The next morning, David returned home with coffee and pastries from Emma's favorite bakery, acting like the devoted husband and father. He kissed Sarah's cheek and asked about her shopping trip with genuine, seeming interest. I found the most beautiful decorations, Sarah said, playing along. Emma's party will be memorable. You have such talent for making people feel special, David said, squeezing her hand. It's one of the things I love most about you. Sarah studied his face, searching for any sign of guilt or deception. He looked sincere, even affectionate. Was she imagining the distance between them? Had the hotel scene been innocent after all? But then David's phone rang, and Sarah saw Rebecca's name on the screen before he quickly declined the call. Work emergency? Sarah asked casually. Nothing that can't wait until Monday? Another lie. Sarah watched David help Michael load his guitar equipment for band practice, laughing at their son's jokes and offering encouragement. He was a good father, engaged and supportive. How could the same man be carrying on an affair with such apparent ease? That afternoon, while David took Emma shopping for school clothes, Sarah made the call to Clarity Investigations. Mrs. Mitchell, Marcus Chen's voice was professional but kind. What can I help you with today? I need to know if my husband is having an affair. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth, making the situation suddenly real. I understand this is difficult. Can you tell me what's prompted your suspicions? Sarah described the overheard phone call, the hotel visit, the increasing absences and secretive behavior. Marcus listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. I can have preliminary findings within a week, he said. But I need to warn you, most people who contact me already know the truth. They're seeking confirmation, not answers. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside her. His breathing was deep and regular, the sleep of someone with a clear conscience. How could he compartmentalize so completely? She thought about their early years together, when they had worked 18-hour days building the company. They had been true partners then, sharing dreams and decisions equally. David had been different, more collaborative, more appreciative of her contributions. Success had changed him gradually. As Mitchell Technologies grew, David began taking more credit and making more unilateral decisions. Sarah's role shifted from co-founder to supportive spouse, but she had accepted it as a natural evolution. Now she wondered if Rebecca represented more than just an affair. Maybe she was David's new business partner, the ambitious young woman who could help him reach the next level of success. Maybe Sarah had simply outlived her usefulness, The thought terrified her more than the betrayal itself. Because if David no longer valued her contributions to his empire, what did she have left? She had no independent career, no significant assets in her own name, no identity separate from being Mrs. David Mitchell. For the first time since discovering the affair, Sarah felt something stronger than hurt or anger. She felt determination. If David wanted to play games with her life and her family's future, she would need to start playing games too. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was up against. The investigation would reveal the scope of David's deception. Then Sarah could decide how to respond. Because one thing was becoming clear: the perfect facade they had built together was about to come crashing down. And this time, Sarah intended to control how the pieces fell. Marcus Chen's preliminary report arrived via encrypted email exactly 1 week later. Sarah read it alone in her home office, her coffee growing cold as the devastating details unfolded across her laptop screen. The affair with Rebecca Stone had been ongoing for 8 months. Marcus had documented 13 hotel meetings, dozens of intimate text messages, and even weekend trips disguised as business travel. But the photos were what made Sarah's hands shake. David and Rebecca holding hands in restaurants, kissing in parking garages, looking at each other with the passionate intensity that used to be reserved for Sarah. The final page contained financial information that made Sarah's blood run cold. Rebecca had been receiving consulting fees through a shell company David had created. $200,000 over 6 months, all traced back to Mitchell Technologies accounts. Sarah closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen window, staring at the garden she had designed herself. Every plant had been chosen for its beauty and resilience. She had built this landscape to last, just like she had built their marriage. But apparently, David preferred something newer and more exciting. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Running late tonight. Don't wait dinner." Sarah typed back, "No problem. Love you." The casual deception was becoming automatic, a skill she never thought she would need to develop. That evening, while helping Emma with her college application essays, Sarah found herself studying her daughter's face. Emma had David's determined chin, but Sarah's thoughtful eyes. In 2 years, she would leave for university. Michael would follow 2 years later. Then what would Sarah have left? "Mom, you're staring at me weird," Emma said, looking up from her laptop. "Sorry, just thinking how proud I am of you. Are you getting sentimental because I'm growing up?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Maybe a little." Later that night, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She opened her laptop and began researching her legal options. Divorce law in California was complex, but one thing became clear. The state's community property rules meant she could claim half of everything built during their marriage. But as Sarah dug deeper into Mitchell Technologies' corporate structure, she discovered something troubling. Over the years, David had created multiple subsidiary companies and offshore entities. Much of their wealth was tied up in complex financial instruments that would be difficult to value or divide. Sarah realized she needed professional help, not just a divorce attorney, but someone who understood corporate law and high-stakes financial investigations. She found Elena Vasquez through an online search for top divorce attorneys, Silicon Valley. Elena's biography was impressive. Harvard Law, former prosecutor, specialist in high-net-worth divorces involving technology companies. Her fees were astronomical, but Sarah had access to their joint accounts. For now. The consultation was scheduled for the following Tuesday, while David was in Seattle for what he claimed was an investor meeting. Sarah told him she was having lunch with her book club. Elena Vasquez's office occupied the top floor of a sleek building in downtown Palo Alto. She was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 40, with an air of quiet confidence that reminded Sarah of herself in her corporate days. "Mrs. Mitchell," Elena said, gesturing to a chair across from her mahogany desk. "What brings you here today?" Sarah handed over Marcus Chen's report. "My husband is having an affair with one of his employees, but I think there might be more to it than just infidelity." Elena read through the documents with professional detachment, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "This is thorough work," she said finally. "The financial irregularities are particularly concerning. Has your husband ever discussed business difficulties with you?" "He tells me very little about the company anymore. But the upcoming product launch is supposed to be huge. He's been under tremendous pressure. Elena leaned forward. Mrs. Mitchell, in my experience, when successful men start mixing business funds with personal affairs, they're usually facing bigger problems than marital dissatisfaction. I'd like to dig deeper into your husband's business dealings. What kind of problems? Cash flow issues, investor pressure, maybe even fraud. The payments to Ms. Stone could be hush money, or they could be related to embezzlement. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we make any moves. Sarah felt a chill. She had assumed David's betrayal was personal. The possibility that he was also betraying his investors and employees made everything more complicated. What do you need from me? Access to financial records, email accounts, anything that might reveal the company's true financial position. But Mrs. Mitchell, I need to warn you, once we start this investigation, there's no going back. Are you prepared for what we might find? Sarah thought about the life she had built, the perfect facade she had maintained for so long. Then she thought about David lying to her face while spending their money on another woman. I'm prepared. Elena outlined a strategy that would take several weeks to execute. They would quietly gather evidence while Sarah maintained her normal routine. The goal was to understand the full scope of David's deceptions before confronting him. One more thing, Elena said as Sarah prepared to leave. Don't change your behavior at home. Don't stop being the supportive wife. If your husband suspects an investigation, he could move assets offshore or take other protective measures. Driving home, Sarah felt like she was living in a spy movie. The woman who had spent 20 years focused on family and community events was now involved in corporate espionage against her own husband. That evening, David returned from Seattle in an unusually good mood. He brought gifts for the children and flowers for Sarah, acting like the devoted family man. How was your book club? He asked, kissing her cheek. Wonderful. We discussed a fascinating novel about marriage and deception. David laughed. Sounds cheerful. What was the title? Sarah smiled sweetly. Gone Girl. If David recognized the irony, he didn't show it. He spent the evening helping Michael with his history homework and discussing Emma's college plans with genuine enthusiasm. Watching him interact with their children, Sarah felt a stab of doubt. Was she overreacting? David was a good father and had been a loving husband for most of their marriage. Maybe the affair was just a midlife crisis that could be resolved with counseling. But then she remembered the secret payments to Rebecca, the elaborate lies, the way David had systematically excluded her from business decisions over the years. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about respect, trust, in the future she had assumed they were building together. Later that night, while David showered, Sarah accessed his laptop using the password she had watched him type hundreds of times. Her hands shook as she copied files to a flash drive, documenting the evidence that would either save her marriage or destroy it. As she worked, Sarah realized she was crossing a line she never thought she would cross. But David had crossed that line first, 8 months ago in a hotel room with Rebecca Stone. Now they were both playing a different game, with stakes higher than either of them fully understood. Sarah just hoped she was smart enough to win it, because losing wasn't just about her pride anymore. It was about her children's future, her own financial security, and the question of whether 20 years of marriage meant anything at all. 2 weeks into Elena's investigation, Sarah received an urgent call that made her blood freeze. Mrs. Mitchell, we need to meet immediately. Elena's voice was tense. I found something that changes everything. Sarah drove to Elena's office with her heart pounding. She found her attorney pacing behind her desk, surrounded by stacks of financial documents and printouts. Sit down, Elena said grimly. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. Sarah gripped the arms of her chair. Just tell me, your husband isn't just having an affair. He's been systematically stealing from his own company for over 2 years. The payments to Rebecca Stone are just the tip of the iceberg. Elena spread documents across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, wire transfer records, corporate filings. David has been creating fake vendor contracts and funneling money through shell companies. We're talking about $15 million that should belong to Mitchell Technologies shareholders. Sarah stared at the papers, trying to process the magnitude of what Elena was saying. 15 million? That's what we can trace so far. But here's the bigger problem. The money isn't going to personal accounts. It's being used to cover massive losses from David's cryptocurrency investments. Your husband has been gambling with company funds and losing badly. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. How is that possible? The company is about to launch their biggest product ever. That's another lie. The AI platform has been delayed indefinitely because of technical problems. David has been covering up the delays while trying to recover the lost funds through increasingly desperate trades. Elena pulled out another set of documents. Mrs. Mitchell, Mitchell Technologies is essentially bankrupt. The only thing keeping it afloat is the money David has been stealing from new investor rounds. Sarah felt sick. What about our house? Our children's college funds? Your personal assets are still intact for now, but they're all tied to company stock. When this comes out, everything will collapse. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not only was her marriage a lie, but their entire financial foundation was built on fraud. Her children's futures, her retirement security, everything she had assumed was stable was actually quicksand. There's more, Elena continued. Rebecca Stone isn't just David's mistress. She's his accomplice. The consulting payments were her cut of the embezzlement scheme. She's been helping him manipulate the books. Sarah laughed bitterly. So the woman destroying my marriage is also destroying my family's future? It appears so. But Mrs. Mitchell, this situation also creates an opportunity. How could this possibly be an opportunity? Elena leaned forward. Because you can expose the fraud before it destroys more lives. If you report this to the Securities and Exchange Commission, you could qualify for whistleblower protection and potentially recover some of the stolen funds. You want me to turn in my own husband? I want you to protect yourself and your children. David has already made his choice. He chose Rebecca over you, and he chose criminal activity over his family's security. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the busy street below. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that her world was imploding. What happens if I do nothing? Eventually, the fraud will be discovered. David and Rebecca will likely face federal charges. Your family will lose everything, and you'll have no legal protection. And if I report it, you become a cooperating witness instead of a victim. The government helps you recover assets, and you have some control over how this unfolds. Sarah turned back to Elena. How long do I have to decide? Not long. My contacts at the SEC suggest they're already receiving anonymous tips about Mitchell Technologies. Someone else might expose this before you have a chance to protect yourself. Driving home, Sarah felt like she was navigating through a nightmare. The man she had trusted with her life and her children's futures had been living a double lie, unfaithful and criminal. Every assumption about their marriage and their security had been false. That evening, David came home in an unusually agitated mood. He barely ate dinner and spent most of the meal checking his phone. Everything okay? Sarah asked, though she now knew the answer. Just some investor drama. Nothing I can't handle. Maybe you should take a vacation. You've been under so much distress lately. David looked at her sharply. We can't afford distractions right now. The product launch is critical. Sarah nodded sympathetically, all while knowing the product launch was fiction and the stress was coming from his crumbling criminal enterprise. Later that night, while David worked in his study, Sarah sat with Michael and Emma in the family room. They were both absorbed in their devices, teenagers living in their own worlds. Soon those worlds would be shattered by their father's choices. Hey guys, Sarah said quietly. I want you to know how proud I am of both of you. Michael looked up from his guitar tabs. Thanks, Mom. You're being weird tonight, though. Just feeling grateful for our family. Emma glanced over from her laptop. Mom, is everything okay between you and Dad? You both seem stressed lately. Sarah forced a smile. Every marriage has its challenges, sweetie. The important thing is that we love you both very much. Are you getting divorced? Emma asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sarah realized her children were more perceptive than she had given them credit for. I hope not, Sarah said honestly. But if something like that ever happened, you need to know that it wouldn't be your fault, and both your father and I would still love you completely. Michael and Emma exchanged worried glances. They knew something was wrong, even if they didn't understand what. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to David's steady breathing and wondering how many more nights they would share the same bed. In a few hours, she would need to make the most difficult decision of her life: protect her husband or protect her family. The answer should have been obvious, but 20 years of marriage and shared history made nothing simple. David was the father of her children, her partner in building a life together. Even knowing what she knew, part of her still hoped there was a way to fix this without destroying everything. But as Sarah stared at the ceiling, she realized that David had already destroyed everything. She was just deciding whether to go down with the ship or find a lifeboat for herself and her children. The morning would bring Elena's deadline and the choice that would define the rest of their lives. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to trust the man sleeping beside her. Those days seemed like ancient history now, a lifetime ago when her biggest worry was choosing the right flowers for a charity gala. Sarah's hands trembled as she dialed the SEC hotline the next morning. She had driven to a parking lot 3 miles from home, wanting to be completely alone for the call that would change everything. Securities and Exchange Commission, Enforcement Division, a crisp voice answered. I need to report securities fraud at a technology company. Shut them. One moment, please. The hold music felt surreal, elevator jazz accompanying the destruction of her marriage. After 2 minutes, a new voice came on the line. This is Agent Patricia Williams. I understand you want to report securities fraud? Yes, my name is Sarah Mitchell, and my husband is David Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Technologies. He's been embezzling investor funds for over 2 years. Sarah spent 30 minutes outlining everything Elena had discovered. The fake vendor contracts, the cryptocurrency losses, Rebecca's involvement, the delayed product launch. Agent Williams asked detailed questions, taking notes that would eventually become the foundation of a federal investigation. Mrs. Mitchell, this is serious information. Are you prepared to provide documentary evidence and testify if necessary? Sarah closed her eyes. Yes. We'll need to meet in person within 48 hours. Don't discuss this conversation with anyone, including your husband. Do you understand? I understand. One more thing. You should consider hiring a criminal defense attorney in addition to your divorce lawyer. Spousal privilege doesn't protect you if you had knowledge of ongoing crimes. The call ended, leaving Sarah alone in her car with the weight of what she had just done. She had crossed the Rubicon. There was no path back to ignorance or denial now. Driving home, Sarah noticed details she had overlooked for months. The for sale sign in the Hendersons' yard, the new Tesla in the Johnsons' driveway, the landscaping crew working on the Chen's garden. Normal life continuing while hers imploded. David was in his study when she returned, speaking in hushed tones on his phone. Through the cracked door, Sarah could hear fragments of conversation. The audit is scheduled for next week. We need to clean up the books before then. Sarah's stomach clenched. David was still trying to cover up the fraud, even as federal investigators prepared to close in. That afternoon, while David attended what he claimed was a board meeting, Sarah met with Elena to plan their next moves. You did the right thing, Elena assured her, but now we need to prepare for the chaos that's coming. How long before the investigation becomes public? Days, not weeks. Federal agencies move quickly once they decide to act. David will likely be arrested within the week. Sarah felt dizzy. The abstract concept of federal investigation was becoming terrifyingly real. What about Rebecca? She'll be arrested too. The consulting payments were clearly criminal conspiracy. And what happens to me? Elena pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. That depends on how cooperative you are with investigators. If you help them build their case, you'll likely avoid charges, but your assets will be frozen pending the investigation. Everything? Bank accounts, investment portfolios, possibly even the house if it was purchased with fraudulent funds. Sarah realized she was about to lose not just her marriage, but potentially her home and financial security. 20 years of building a life together, wiped out by David's choices. Elena, I need to tell my children before this becomes public. They can't learn about their father's arrest from news reports. That's wise, but be careful what you say. Anything you tell them could potentially be used in court. That evening, Sarah cooked David's favorite dinner, salmon with asparagus and wild rice. She wanted one last normal family meal before their world exploded. David seemed distracted throughout dinner, checking his phone constantly and barely participating in conversation about Emma's college applications and Michael's upcoming guitar recital. Dad, are you even listening? Emma asked, frustrated. Sorry, sweetheart. Work has been intense lately. When will it calm down? Michael asked. David looked at his son with an expression Sarah couldn't decipher. Sadness, guilt, fear. Soon, David said quietly. Very soon. After dinner, Sarah suggested they watch a movie together as a family, something they hadn't done in months. They settled on a comedy that had everyone laughing, creating the illusion of normalcy Sarah desperately wanted to preserve. But as she watched David joke with their children, Sarah felt a profound sadness. Whatever his crimes, he genuinely loved Michael and Emma. His arrest would devastate them almost as much as it would devastate him. Late that night, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah found David standing in his study staring at his computer screen. The blue light illuminated his face, showing exhaustion and something that looked like defeat. David, Sarah said softly. He startled, quickly minimizing whatever he had been looking at. I didn't hear you come in. You looked upset. Is everything okay? For a moment, David's carefully constructed facade cracked. Sarah saw vulnerability in his eyes that reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with 23 years ago. Sarah, if something happened to me, would you take care of the kids? The question sent ice through Sarah's veins. What do you mean if something happened? Hypothetically, if I had to go away for a while, would you make sure Michael and Emma were okay? Sarah stepped closer. David, you're scaring me. What's going on? He looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah wondered if he was about to confess everything. Instead, he shook his head and turned back to his computer. Nothing, just work stress. Forget I said anything. But Sarah couldn't forget. David's question felt like a goodbye, as if he knew his arrest was imminent. The next morning, Sarah woke up alone. David's side of the bed was cold and his car was gone from the garage. A note on the kitchen counter said he had left early for a breakfast meeting. Sarah checked the news websites obsessively, looking for any mention of Mitchell Technologies or federal investigations. Nothing yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Her phone rang at 10:15. Elena's voice was urgent. Sarah, where's David right now? I don't know. He left early for a meeting. Why? Federal agents just raided Mitchell Technologies' headquarters. They're executing search warrants for financial records. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into a kitchen chair. It's happening. Yes, and Sarah. They're also looking for David and Rebecca. If he contacts you, don't lie to protect him. Obstruction of justice charges won't help your family. The call ended, leaving Sarah alone with the knowledge that her husband was now a federal fugitive. She thought about his strange question the night before and realized he might have known this was coming. Had David fled? Was he planning to abandon their children and leave Sarah to face the consequences of his crimes? As Sarah sat in her silent kitchen, she realized that the man she had loved for 20 years was gone. Maybe he had been gone for a long time, replaced by someone capable of betrayal on multiple levels. Now she had to figure out how to protect her children from the fallout of their father's choices, starting with the conversation she had been dreading, explaining why Daddy might not be coming home tonight. The first news van arrived at noon. Sarah watched from her bedroom window as reporters set up cameras on the sidewalk across from their house, her sanctuary becoming the center of a media circus. Her phone had been ringing nonstop since Elena's call. Reporters, neighbors, friends who had seen the breaking news about Mitchell Technologies. Sarah let them all go to voicemail. At 12:30, Michael came home for lunch and found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched coffee. Mom, why are there news trucks outside? He asked, dropping his backpack by the door. Sarah looked at her 16-year-old son, trying to find words for an impossible conversation. Sit down, sweetie. We need to talk. Michael's face went pale. Are you and Dad getting divorced? There's been a problem with Dad's company. The government is investigating some financial issues. What kind of financial issues? Sarah took a deep breath. They think Dad might have taken money that didn't belong to him. Michael stared at her in disbelief. Like stealing? Yes. But Dad's rich. Why would he steal money? I don't know, Michael. I really don't know. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelation settling between them. Finally, Michael asked the question Sarah had been dreading. Where is Dad now? I don't know that either. In them. When Emma came home from school an hour later, Sarah had to repeat the devastating conversation. Emma's reaction was anger. "This is insane," she said, pacing around the kitchen. "Dad wouldn't steal money. Someone made a mistake." "Emma, I know this is hard to accept. How do you know it's true? Maybe the investigators are wrong." Sarah wanted to protect her daughter's faith in her father, but lies had already caused enough damage. "I've seen evidence, sweetheart. Dad did take money from his company." Emma's face crumpled. "Why would he do that to us?" It was the same question Sarah had been asking herself for weeks. Why would David risk their family's future for money and a woman young enough to be his daughter? At 4 o'clock, 2 FBI agents appeared at their front door. Sarah recognized Agent Williams from her phone description. Mid-40s, professional demeanor, kind but serious eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Agent Williams. This is Agent Rodriguez. May we come in?" Sarah led them to the living room, acutely aware of the family photos covering every surface. Images of happier times when David's smile was genuine and their future seemed secure. "We need to ask you about your husband's whereabouts," Agent Williams said. "I haven't seen him since yesterday evening. He left early this morning for what he said was a breakfast meeting." Agent Rodriguez took notes while Agent Williams continued questioning. "Did he seem anxious or unusual in any way?" Sarah thought about David's strange question about taking care of the children. "He asked me something odd last night. He wanted to know if I would take care of our kids if something happened to him." The agents exchanged glances. "What exactly did he say?" "He asked if I would take care of Michael and Emma if he had to go away for a while." "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Williams said gently, "your husband withdrew $500,000 from various accounts yesterday afternoon. His credit cards show purchases of airline tickets and hotel reservations." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "He's running." "It appears so. We've issued a federal warrant for his arrest, and Rebecca Stone is already in custody." The news that Rebecca had been arrested gave Sarah a twisted sense of satisfaction. At least one of the people who had destroyed her family was facing consequences. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "We'll continue searching for your husband. In the meantime, we need to freeze your family's assets pending the investigation." "All of them?" Agent Rodriguez looked up from his notepad. "Bank accounts, investment portfolios, and potentially this house if it was purchased with fraudulent funds." Sarah realized her worst fears were coming true. Not only had David abandoned his family, but he had left them financially destroyed. "How am I supposed to support my children?" "The court will likely release funds for basic living expenses once you file the appropriate paperwork," Agent Williams explained. "Your cooperation with our investigation will help expedite that process." After the agents left, Sarah called Elena to discuss their legal options. The news was uniformly bad. David's flight made him look guilty and complicated any potential plea negotiations. Sarah's status as an abandoned spouse helped her legally, but didn't solve her immediate financial problems. That evening, Sarah ordered pizza for dinner because their credit cards had been frozen and she only had $43 in cash. The simple act of counting crumpled bills felt like a preview of their new reality. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Emma asked, picking at her slice. "We're going to figure it out," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "I'm going to get a job, and we'll downsize our expenses. Certainly." "What about college?" Emma's voice was small. Sarah's heart broke. Emma had been accepted to Stanford with partial scholarship, but they still needed $50,000 for her first year. Michael was equally talented academically and would face the same challenges in 2 years. "We'll find a way," Sarah promised, though she had no idea how. That night, alone in the house where she had raised her children and built what she thought was a solid marriage, Sarah finally allowed herself to cry. She sobbed for the husband she had lost, the security that had vanished, and the future that had been stolen from her children. But as her tears dried, Sarah felt something unexpected. Relief. For weeks, she had been living with the weight of David's deceptions. Now the truth was public, and she could stop pretending. She also felt anger, clean and pure and energizing. David had not only betrayed her trust, but he had abandoned their children when they needed him most. He had run away like a coward, leaving Sarah to clean up the wreckage of his choices. If David thought she would collapse under the pressure, he was wrong. Sarah had built one empire alongside him. Now she would build another one without him, focused on protecting and providing for Michael and Emma. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a plan. She would sell everything they owned that wasn't frozen by the government. She would find work using the skills that had made Mitchell Technologies successful. And she would make sure her children understood that their father's crimes didn't define their worth or their potential. David Mitchell had underestimated his wife for years, treating her like a decorative accessory to his success. Now he was about to learn what Sarah Mitchell was truly capable of when fighting for her family's survival. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 days after David's disappearance, Sarah sat in the unemployment office filling out job applications for the first time in 20 years. The fluorescent lights and institutional green walls felt surreal after the glass towers and marble lobbies of her former life. She had liquidated everything she could legally sell: jewelry, art, her Tesla. The cash would cover basic expenses for 3 months, maybe 4 if she was careful. But Sarah needed income, not just emergency funds. The job market was brutal for a 45-year-old woman whose recent work experience consisted of charity events and school fundraisers. Despite her MBA and early career success, most employers saw a gap-filled resume and made assumptions. "So you've been out of the workforce for 15 years?" the interviewer at a marketing firm said, barely glancing at Sarah's application. "I was building and managing a foundation that raised over $10 million for children's education," Sarah replied. "I also helped develop the initial product strategy for Mitchell Technologies." "Right. The company that's been in the news lately." The interviewer's tone turned cold. "We'll be in touch." Sarah knew they wouldn't call back. David's crimes had tainted her by association, making her radioactive to potential employers who feared scandal. After a week of similar rejections, Sarah realized she needed a different approach. She couldn't run from her connection to Mitchell Technologies. She needed to leverage it. That's when she remembered Rebecca's consulting company. During Elena's investigation, they had discovered that Rebecca operated a legitimate marketing consulting firm alongside her criminal activities. If Sarah could prove Rebecca had been stealing clients while working for David, she might be able to recover some assets. Sarah spent 2 days researching Rebecca's business, using public records and LinkedIn profiles to map her client base. What she found was infuriating. Rebecca had been systematically poaching Mitchell Technologies' smaller clients, convincing them to pay her consulting firm for services they should have received from David's company. "This is actionable," Elena confirmed when Sarah presented her findings. "Rebecca violated her employment contract and potentially committed additional fraud. Can we get the money back?" "Some of it. And more importantly, we can use this to negotiate with prosecutors. If you help them build a stronger case against Rebecca, they might be more flexible about asset recovery." Sarah felt her first glimmer of hope in weeks. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was an active participant in bringing David and Rebecca to justice. The breakthrough came when Agent Williams called with unexpected news. David had been arrested in Costa Rica, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country. "He'll be extradited within the week," Agent Williams explained. "His arrest might create opportunities for plea negotiations." Sarah's emotions were complicated. Part of her felt relief that David would face consequences for his actions, but another part grieved for the man she had once loved and the father her children had lost. Michael and Emma reacted differently to the news. Michael became angry and withdrawn, refusing to discuss his father at all. Emma wanted to visit David in jail, clinging to hope that he could explain everything. "Sweetheart, Dad made choices that hurt a lot of people," Sarah explained gently. "Visiting him won't change what happened." "But he's still my father," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, he is, and that will never change. But right now, we need to focus on taking care of ourselves." Sarah's job search finally gained traction when she applied for a position with a nonprofit focused on financial literacy education. The executive director, Margaret Chen, was a former prosecutor who understood the complexities of white-collar crime. "Your experience with corporate fraud gives you unique insights," Margaret said during the interview. "You understand both the business side and the victim perspective." "I want to help people avoid what my family went through," Sarah replied honestly. The job paid $45,000 annually, less than David had spent on wine in a typical year, but it provided health insurance and the dignity of meaningful work. On Sarah's first day, she discovered that Mitchell Technologies had been one of the nonprofit's corporate sponsors. David had attended their fundraising galas, giving speeches about financial responsibility while secretly embezzling millions. The irony was bitter, but it also gave Sarah motivation. She would help other families recognize the warning signs she had missed, protect themselves from predatory financial schemes, and rebuild after betrayal. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against David and Rebecca moved forward rapidly. Rebecca's defense attorney approached Elena about a plea deal. Rebecca would testify against David in exchange for reduced charges. She's willing to detail the entire conspiracy, Elena explained during one of their weekly meetings. But she wants to paint herself as David's victim, claiming he manipulated her into participating. Sarah laughed bitterly. The woman who destroyed my marriage wants sympathy? It doesn't matter what we think of her motives. Her testimony could help you recover more assets and reduce David's sentence if he cooperates. Sarah realized she had to make a choice. Pursue maximum punishment for both David and Rebecca, or accept plea deals that might help her family rebuild faster. The decision became easier when she learned that David had been negotiating his own plea without considering his family's needs. He was willing to forfeit assets to reduce his prison time, leaving Sarah and the children with nothing. He's still thinking only of himself, Sarah told Elena. Even now, even facing federal prison, he won't take responsibility for what he's done to us. That night, Sarah sat down with Michael and Emma to explain the plea negotiations. She wanted them to understand their father's continuing selfishness, but also to help them process their complex feelings. Your father has an opportunity to help us recover some money by cooperating with prosecutors, she explained, but he's choosing to protect himself instead. Michael's jaw tightened. So he screws us over again. Language, Sarah said automatically, then smiled sadly. But yes, essentially. Emma looked confused. Why won't he help us? Sarah struggled to answer. How do you explain to a 14-year-old that her father values his own comfort more than his children's future? Some people, when they're in trouble, make decisions based on fear instead of love, she said finally. Your father is afraid of going to prison for a long time. But we're his family, Emma protested. Yes, we are. And that makes his choices even more difficult to understand. As Sarah tucked Emma into bed that night, her daughter asked the question that had been haunting them all. Mom, do you think Dad ever loved us? Sarah thought about their early years together, the genuine joy on David's face when the children were born, the pride he showed at their accomplishments. I think he loved us the best way he knew how, she said carefully, but somewhere along the way, he lost sight of what really mattered. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was honest. And honesty, Sarah had learned, was the foundation of everything she was trying to rebuild. 6 months after David's arrest, Sarah found herself in federal court watching her husband plead guilty to embezzlement, securities fraud, and money laundering. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, the commanding presence that had once filled boardrooms reduced to that of just another defendant. David's eyes found Sarah's across the courtroom. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she had married, vulnerable and seeking connection. Then the moment passed, and he looked away. Judge Elizabeth Morrison accepted David's plea deal, 8 years in federal prison in exchange for full cooperation and asset forfeiture. The sentence was less than the maximum, but longer than Sarah had expected. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Morrison said sternly, your crimes have destroyed not only your own life, but the lives of innocent investors, employees, and your own family. The court hopes your cooperation will help victims recover some of their losses. After the hearing, Sarah met with the federal prosecutor to discuss asset recovery. The news was mixed. While David's cooperation had helped them trace most of the stolen funds, much of the money had been lost in cryptocurrency speculation. We estimate you'll recover about 30% of your original net worth, the prosecutor explained. It's not everything, but it's enough to provide some stability for your family. Sarah nodded. 30% of their former wealth was still more money than most families ever saw. Her children could attend college, and Sarah could consider starting her own business. But the financial recovery couldn't repair the emotional damage. Michael had become increasingly distant, refusing therapy and channeling his anger into aggressive behavior at school. Emma struggled with trust issues, questioning every adult relationship in her life. Sarah herself was in therapy twice a week, trying to process not just David's betrayal, but her own role in the marriage's dysfunction. Had she enabled his narcissism by being too accommodating? Had she ignored warning signs because the lifestyle was comfortable? Marriages are complex systems, her therapist, Dr. Sarah Brennan, explained. You can acknowledge mistakes without taking responsibility for David's criminal choices. The hardest part was explaining David's actions to friends and family. Sarah's parents had loved David like a son, and his betrayal devastated them almost as much as it devastated Sarah. I trusted him with my daughter's future, Sarah's father said during one particularly difficult conversation. How could I have been so wrong about his character? We all were, Sarah replied. David was very good at showing people what they wanted to see. Rebecca's trial provided some answers about the scope of the conspiracy. Testifying for a reduced sentence, she painted David as a master manipulator who had gradually drawn her into criminal activity. He made me feel special, Rebecca said on the witness stand. He said his wife didn't understand his vision, that I was the partner he needed to take the company to the next level. Sarah watched Rebecca's testimony from the gallery, studying the woman who had helped destroy her family. Rebecca was clearly intelligent and ambitious, but also naive about David's true nature. During a break in proceedings, Rebecca's attorney approached Sarah. My client wants to apologize, he said. She knows her actions hurt your family. Sarah considered the offer. Part of her wanted to tell Rebecca exactly what she thought of her apology, but Sarah was trying to model emotional maturity for her children. Tell her I accept her apology, Sarah said finally, but also tell her that understanding consequences is part of growing up. The media attention around the trial was intense but eventually died down. Sarah learned to ignore the tabloid headlines and gossip blogs that reduced her family's tragedy to entertainment. What mattered more was the gradual healing happening at home. Michael's anger was slowly giving way to sadness, which felt like progress. Emma was making new friends and rediscovering interests beyond her father's approval. Sarah's work at the financial literacy nonprofit was fulfilling in ways she hadn't expected. She spoke at conferences about recognizing fraud, helped families navigate bankruptcy, and developed educational programs for young adults. You have a gift for this, Margaret Chen told her during Sarah's 6-month review. Have you considered going back to school for counseling or social work? The suggestion planted a seed in Sarah's mind. For the first time since David's arrest, she began thinking about her own future instead of just surviving the present. One evening in late spring, almost a year after the investigation began, Sarah sat in her garden watching Emma practice violin and Michael work on his motorcycle. They had sold the mansion and moved to a smaller house in a less exclusive neighborhood, but the garden was still beautiful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. David wants to see you. He's asking for a visit. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. She hadn't spoken to David since his arrest, though he had written several letters that she had returned unopened. What could he possibly want to say now? Apologize? Explain? Try to justify his actions? Emma noticed her mother's expression. Mom, you okay? Your father wants to see me. Emma set down her violin. Are you going to visit him? I don't know. What do you think? I think, Emma said carefully, that you should do whatever helps you feel better. You've spent enough time worrying about what other people need. The wisdom from her 14-year-old daughter brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Emma was right. For 20 years, Sarah had shaped her decisions around David's needs and opinions. Now she could choose based on her own healing. I don't think I'm ready to see him yet, Sarah said. That's okay too, Emma replied, picking up her violin again. As music filled the garden, Sarah realized she had finally found something David's crimes couldn't take away. The knowledge that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, capable of rebuilding not just financially, but emotionally. The empire David had built was gone, but Sarah was constructing something more valuable, a life based on truth, resilience, and genuine love for her children. 2 years after David's sentencing, Sarah stood in the conference room of her own consulting firm, presenting a financial recovery plan to a family whose small business had been destroyed by embezzlement. The parallels to her own experience were painful but also empowering. Recovery isn't just about money, Sarah explained to the distraught couple. It's about rebuilding trust in yourself and your ability to make sound decisions. Her company, Phoenix Financial Recovery, specialized in helping fraud victims navigate the legal and emotional aftermath of financial betrayal. Sarah had used her settlement money to launch the business, drawing on her painful expertise to help others. The work was challenging but meaningful. Sarah discovered she had a talent for helping people process trauma while taking practical steps toward stability. Her own experience gave her credibility that no textbook could provide. Michael had graduated high school with strong grades despite his struggles after David's arrest. He chose a state university over more expensive private options, understanding the family's new financial reality without resentment. "I want to study criminal justice," he told Sarah during his senior year. "Maybe help investigate white-collar crime." Sarah felt proud and sad simultaneously. Her son's career choice was clearly influenced by his father's betrayal, but channeling that pain into purpose seemed healthy. Emma was thriving at 17, her natural resilience helping her adapt to their changed circumstances. She had taken a part-time job at a local music store and was saving for college while maintaining excellent grades. "I don't miss the big house," Emma confided to Sarah one evening. "It never felt like home anyway. Dad was always in his study, and you were always planning events for other people." The observation stung because it was accurate. Their old life had been performative, focused on appearances rather than genuine connection. Sarah's relationship with David remained complicated. He called occasionally from prison, and she had finally agreed to take his calls after 18 months. The conversations were awkward but gradually becoming less painful. "I know I destroyed everything," David said during one recent conversation. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I regret the pain I caused you and the kids." "David, I'm not ready to discuss forgiveness yet," Sarah replied honestly. "Right now I'm focused on helping Michael and Emma heal." "How are they doing?" Sarah considered how much to share. Despite everything, David was still their father, and the children's therapist had suggested that some contact might be beneficial. "They're doing well. Michael's planning to study criminal justice, and Emma's considering music therapy as a career." "They're following your example," David said quietly, "turning pain into purpose." The comment surprised Sarah with its insight. Maybe prison was giving David time for genuine reflection. Sarah's personal life was slowly evolving too. She had started dating again, though cautiously. Her therapist had helped her understand how David's manipulation had eroded her confidence in her own judgment. "I keep expecting men to lie to me," Sarah told Dr. Brennan during one session. "I analyze every conversation for hidden meanings." "That's natural given what you experienced, but don't let David's betrayal prevent you from trusting worthy people." Sarah had met Tom Rodriguez through her work. He was a family attorney who specialized in helping children affected by parental financial crimes. Their relationship was developing slowly, built on friendship and shared professional interests. "You don't have to protect yourself from everyone," Tom told her when Sarah expressed anxiety about their growing closeness. "Some people actually mean what they say." The concept was still foreign to Sarah, but she was learning to distinguish between healthy caution and paralyzed fear. Her children liked Tom, which mattered more to Sarah than romantic chemistry. After David's betrayal, she was determined that any new relationship would enhance their family rather than complicate it. On the third anniversary of David's arrest, Sarah, Michael, and Emma visited a restaurant that had become their tradition for marking difficult dates. They called it Honesty Dinner, where they could say anything about their feelings without judgment. "I still miss Dad sometime," Emma admitted over dessert. "Not the criminal version, but the guy who taught me to play chess and helped with my science projects." "That's okay," Sarah assured her. "You can miss parts of someone while still being angry about their choices." Michael had been quiet through most of dinner, but finally spoke up. "I used to be embarrassed about what Dad did. Now I'm kind of proud of how we handled it." Sarah felt tears threaten. "We did handle it well, didn't we?" "You handled it well," Michael corrected. "Emma and I just tried not to make things worse." "You both made things better by being honest about your feelings and supporting each other," Sarah said. "That's what families do." Driving home that night, Sarah reflected on how much their definition of success had changed. 3 years ago, success meant David's latest business triumph or a perfectly executed charity gala. Now it meant honest conversations, stable emotions, and the knowledge that they could weather any crisis together. Sarah's phone rang as she pulled into their driveway. Elena's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, I have news about the final asset recovery. The government is releasing another $200,000 from David's offshore accounts. The money would help fund Emma's college education and provide additional security for their future. But more than the financial benefit, the recovery represented justice. Thank you for everything, Elena. I couldn't have navigated this without you. You're stronger than you realized back then, Elena replied. You just needed circumstances that forced you to show it. As Sarah entered her house, she found Michael practicing guitar and Emma reading in the living room. The space was smaller than their old mansion, but filled with genuine warmth. Everything okay? Emma asked, noticing Sarah's emotional expression. Everything's good, Sarah replied. We're getting some more money back from Dad's accounts. That's great, Michael said without looking up from his guitar. But we would have been fine either way. His casual confidence in their family's resilience touched Sarah deeply. Her children had learned that happiness didn't depend on external circumstances, but on authentic relationships and personal integrity. Later that night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back was different from the one who had hosted charity galas and managed David's social calendar. This woman had weathered betrayal and emerged stronger, more authentic, more purposeful. The empire David had built was gone forever, but Sarah had constructed something more valuable, a life grounded in truth, supported by genuine love, and dedicated to helping others navigate their own dark valleys. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with her choices and confidence in her future. 5 years after David's arrest, Sarah stood at the podium of the National Financial Crimes Victims Conference, looking out at an audience of survivors who had faced similar betrayals. Her keynote speech would close 3 days of workshops, support groups, and advocacy training. When my husband was arrested for embezzling $15 million, Sarah began, I thought my life was over. I was wrong. My old life was over, but my real life was just beginning. The audience listened intently as Sarah described her journey from devastated victim to successful entrepreneur and advocate. Phoenix Financial Recovery now employed 12 people and had helped over 300 families rebuild after fraud. Recovery isn't about returning to who you were before, Sarah continued. It's about discovering who you're capable of becoming when you stop living someone else's definition of success. After her speech, Sarah was approached by a young woman whose father had embezzled from his construction company. I feel so ashamed, the woman said, tears in her eyes. Everyone in our town knows what he did. Sarah remembered feeling that same toxic shame, the belief that David's crime somehow reflected on her character. Shame belongs to the person who committed the crime, Sarah said gently. Your job is to build a life you can be proud of, regardless of what your father chose. Auna, the conference ended with a reception where survivors shared stories and strategies. Sarah was gratified to see genuine friendships forming between people who understood each other's trauma in ways their original support networks couldn't. Flying home to California, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. Michael was finishing his junior year studying criminology and already interning with the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Emma was double majoring in music therapy and psychology, planning to help children process trauma through creative expression. Both kids had visited David in prison several times over the past year. The conversations were difficult, but seemed to be helping them process their complex feelings about their father. He's different now, Emma had reported after their most recent visit. More honest about what he did and why. He seems genuinely sorry. Sarah was glad her children were finding a way to maintain some relationship with David, though she still struggled with forgiveness. Dr. Brennan had helped her understand that forgiveness was a process, not a destination. Tom Rodriguez had become a permanent part of their family, though he and Sarah had chosen to live together rather than remarry. I want our relationship to be about choice, not legal obligation, Sarah had explained when Tom proposed. We've both seen how marriage contracts can complicate things. Tom understood Sarah's hesitation about remarriage and was content with their committed partnership. He had become a mentor to Michael and Emma, offering the steady male presence they needed without trying to replace their father. Sarah's relationship with David remained cordial but distant. They spoke monthly about the children's activities and milestones, but avoided deeper emotional topics. Sarah was grateful for David's cooperation in parenting decisions, but trust would never be fully restored. Some wounds heal, she had told a support group. Others just stop bleeding. Both outcomes are acceptable. The legal aftermath of David's crimes was finally concluding. Rebecca had served 18 months in federal prison, and was now working as a paralegal, barred from financial services forever. She had sent Sarah a letter of apology that was more mature and thoughtful than anything she had said during the trial. "I know my apology can't undo the damage," Rebecca had written, "but I want you to know that watching your family's grace under pressure taught me what real strength looks like." Sarah had kept the letter without responding. Some gestures deserved acknowledgement without requiring reciprocation. Phoenix Financial Recovery was expanding into other states, training therapists and attorneys to work with fraud victims. Sarah had been invited to testify before Congress about improving support systems for white-collar crime survivors. "Traditional victim services focus on violent crime," she had told the Senate subcommittee, "but financial betrayal can be equally devastating, especially when it comes from trusted family members or business partners." The work was becoming Sarah's legacy, more meaningful than any charity gala she had organized during her marriage to David. On a quiet Sunday evening in late spring, Sarah sat in her garden reading while Michael practiced guitar on the porch, and Emma painted at an easel nearby. Tom was grilling dinner, and the scene felt perfectly ordinary in the best possible way. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is David. I'm being released next month. Can we talk?" Sarah stared at the message, her heart rate quickening. David had served 6 years of his 8-year sentence, earning early release for good behavior and continued cooperation with federal investigators. "Everything okay?" Tom asked, noticing Sarah's expression. "David's getting out of prison next month." Michael and Emma both looked up from their activities. They had known this day was coming, but hadn't discussed how they felt about their father's return to civilian life. "What does that mean for us?" Emma asked. "Nothing changes unless we want it to," Sarah replied. "Your father will need to rebuild his own life. We don't owe him anything beyond basic courtesy." Michael set down his guitar. "I'd like to see him when he gets out. Not because I forgive him, but because I want to understand who he is now." Emma nodded. "Me too. But I don't want him thinking he can just pick up where he left off." Sarah felt proud of her children's maturity. They had learned to hold complex emotions without letting those feelings control their decisions. That night, Sarah called Dr. Brennan to discuss David's impending release and her own complicated reactions. "Are you worried about seeing him again?" Dr. Brennan asked. "Not worried exactly, but curious about who he's become. Prison changes people, sometimes for the better. What would you need from him to feel comfortable having any kind of relationship?" Sarah considered the question. "Continued honesty about what he did and why, respect for our boundaries, and no expectation that I'll help him rebuild his life. Those sound like reasonable conditions." The next morning, Sarah responded to David's text. "We can have one conversation when you're ready. The children may choose to see you separately. Beyond that, we'll take things one day at a time." His response came quickly. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Ekum." For the first time in 6 years, David's words felt genuinely humble rather than calculated. As Sarah prepared for work that Monday, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She had started as a dependent wife in a performative marriage, become a crime victim and single mother, and emerged as a successful entrepreneur and advocate. The journey had been painful beyond description, but it had also revealed strengths she never knew she possessed. David's betrayal had destroyed the life she thought she wanted, but it had revealed the life she actually needed. Walking into her office that morning, Sarah saw the wall of thank you letters from families Phoenix Financial Recovery had helped. Each letter represented someone who had refused to let betrayal define their future. Sarah's assistant handed her a schedule packed with client meetings, speaking engagements, and media interviews. The calendar reflected a life of purpose and impact, built on authentic relationships rather than social performance. The empire David had constructed with stolen money was gone forever, but the empire Sarah had built from its ruins was stronger, more meaningful, and entirely her own. As she reviewed her notes for the day's first client meeting, Sarah smiled. The woman she was about to counsel had discovered her business partner's embezzlement just weeks ago. She was devastated, confused, and convinced her life was over. Sarah knew better. The woman's old life was ending, but her real life was about to begin, and Sarah would be there to help her discover just how strong she could become when she stopped living in someone else's shadow and started building her own foundation. The silent empire Sarah had constructed wasn't built on money or status. It was built on truth, resilience, and the knowledge that authentic power comes from helping others find their own strength. And unlike the empire David had built on lies, this one would last forever. Sarah Mitchell's story proves that sometimes our greatest devastation becomes our greatest transformation. She lost a fortune, but gained something invaluable: the knowledge that she could survive anything and help others do the same. The empire David built crumbled in months. The empire Sarah built from its ashes has been growing stronger for years, touching hundreds of lives and creating real, lasting change. What struck me most about Sarah's journey wasn't just her resilience, but her refusal to let betrayal make her bitter. Instead, she turned her pain into purpose, her trauma into triumph. If Sarah's story moved you, if it reminded you that we're all stronger than we realize, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment when everything you believed about your life turned out to be wrong? How did you rebuild? And if you know someone who's facing their own dark valley right now, consider sharing this story with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that even the most devastating betrayal can become the beginning of our most authentic life. Hit that like button if this story inspired you, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when life tests their limits. Until next time, remember, the most powerful empires aren't built from conquest, but from the courage to rebuild after betrayal.